The story of Ted the Caver is one of the first unique horror tales ever uploaded to the internet. Although it was eventually debunked, Ted the Caver spawned an entire subculture fascinated by deadly stories of spelunking gone wrong. One day in 2006, a family from Utah visited the Timpanogos Cave system near where Ted and his friend Brad discovered a new cave just 8 years before. Then, a series of chilling events turned the family's fun caving trip into a nightmare. In the chaos that followed, two men, a Ukrainian and a Russian named Vitaly Tsikoza, joined together and risked their lives to save a 3-year-old girl. This is the true story behind Ted the Caver and the tragedy at Timpanogos Cave. Nearly 30 years ago, a man named Ted found a new area inside a small cave system dubbed the Interstate Caves, which are located below Interstate 80 near the Wasatch Mountain Range and the Timpanogos Cave National Monument in Utah. This new passage was too small to climb through, so he spent months slowly and delicately widening the hole. Ted was joined by his friend Brad, and together the pair slowly chiseled and dug through the passage for a little over a year, from December 30th, 1999 to February 24th, 2000. Because of the cave's unique shape, the pair had to create new tools for the project, which were featured in a photo on the site. Once they broke through, Ted and Brad had accomplished a feat that every caver dreams about. They found a new, undiscovered passage that no human had ever seen before. To commemorate the event, and to add shock value to his site, Ted took an iconic photo that's still circulated all across the internet to this day. Ted also took notes on the cave as they dug, and, like a smart caver, he shared his stories with his family and friends, so they always knew where he was when he went caving. Sure, he was practicing safe caving, but he wasn't really thinking about that. He couldn't stop himself from gushing about his newfound cave. Eventually, he realized he was repeating the same information to everyone, so he created a blog on a web host called Angelfire and uploaded his journal to it. Now, anyone who wanted an update on the cave could read his progress there. But since his friends were fellow cavers, he decided to have a little fun and alter the journal with inside jokes, like references to the Hodag, a folktale creature with a frog face, a long furry body, bull horns, sharp teeth, and spikes down its back. Then he added subtle details to make it scary. After that, the project took on a life of its own, and he altered more of the journal until it was a completely unique story based on his experiences, but separate from reality. Ted, Brad, and Brad's dog explored the passage he called Floyd's Tomb, named after the famous caving pioneer Floyd Collins, who died after meticulously digging through a new passage in Sand Cave in Kentucky. Even after a year of digging, the whole passage was an incredibly tight crawl. Brad had recently recovered after breaking his legs in a horrific accident. He was told he'd never walk again, but somehow he squeezed and crawled through this impossible tunnel. The passage also challenged Ted, who had a panic attack during his first claustrophobic caving experience, but the pair didn't give up and they kept exploring. In the story, the pair heard ghostly noises and described cryptic markings like those in the movie The Blair Witch Project. The story ends on a cliffhanger, and it became what's now known as a creepypasta, a scary story circulated on the internet. This caving tale even inspired an officially endorsed and authorized movie called Living Dark, the story of Ted the Caver. The story was originally posted semi-anonymously, which made it even more mysterious, but Ted later released a statement after other people tried to take credit for his work. Professional caver Ralph Powers wrote on a now-defunct forum hosted by the National Speleological Society and confirmed that Ted and Brad were real people. Ralph Powers and his team even became the first group to survey the cave after Ted and Brad first unearthed it. Then, in a little-known interview in 2021, YouTuber Nick Bodick revealed Ted's identity to be Ted Hiegman. Archives of the original story and the forums still exist, though many of the original links are dead, including the link to the original cave maps hosted by the National Park Service. Today, Ralph's survey from the cave in Ted's story is available from caver and photographer Brandon Kowalis, and it's hosted by John Jasper, who are both members of the Timpanogos Grotto rescue team and were with Ralph for the survey. Strangely, Ted's story seemed to predict a few of caving's most nightmarish disasters. The interstate cave near Timpanogos is located roughly 43 miles away from the notorious Nutty Putty Cave. Much like Interstate Cave, Nutty Putty was a very tight crawl. On November 24, 2009, a 26-year-old father named John Jones was exploring the cave when he reached a very narrow corner that descended into the unknown. Hoping to discover a new passage, Jones pressed all the air out of his lungs, practically dislocated his shoulder, and desperately wormed his way through until he was upside down. Jones got stuck. Rescuers couldn't save him. He died a gruesome death, and the cave was sealed in concrete. But there's a lesser-known story that happened after Ted's story and before the Nutty Putty disaster. This nightmare unfolded in the Timpanogos Cave system, which would one day connect the interstate caves. Some cavers already say that the interstate caves are part of the Timpanogos Cave system since they form beneath the same peaks. The interstate caves are located in a very strange place. They're above, below, and to the side of the notorious U.S. freeway Interstate 80. I-80 runs all the way across the U.S. from San Francisco to New Jersey. But the section in Utah and Wyoming is known for a series of baffling deaths and disappearances. The mystery started when 73-year-old Nan Dixon vanished on September 21, 1978. And over the decades, people keep disappearing or dying near I-80. The I-80 deaths generated mass speculation, fueled by the true story of the unsolved I-70 killer. The freeway cave that Ted explored is the longest of the interstate caves, with 1,062 feet of surveyed passages mapped and explored. But it's located in a valley right next to Mount Timpanogos, which houses a much larger cave network and many of its own mysteries. Mount Timpanogos is otherwise known as Bomber Peak, after a B-25 mysteriously crashed into the side of the mountain in 1955. Strangely, those remnants of a war long past would become a warning of the carnage today, when Mount Timpanogos was stained with blood once again. Prior to the recent invasion in Europe, Russian and Ukrainian citizens were often close, thanks to their shared cultural connections that have developed over the years. In 2006, one pair of friends from both sides of the now warring countries came to the U.S. to visit their mutual family friend in Utah. Their friend was a mother with her 3 children, an older daughter and son, and a younger 3-year-old daughter. The adventurous group decided to visit the Timpanogos Cave National Monument. The main cave houses a 1.5-mile-long section for tourists, giving it the perfect balance of exploration and safety for the children in the party. Luckily, a ranger staffed at the cave park also knew Russian, so the group even had an interpreter to help the Russian, Vitaly Tsikoza, and his Ukrainian friend. Timpanogos Cave is only accessible via a paved mountainside trail, so the group drove to the parking space near I-80 and started their hike in the early afternoon. The trail begins in a forest, with leaves lining the hillside, but further up, broken rocks coat the barren slopes. The group found the occasional bench along the trail as the terrain morphed, becoming increasingly more mountainous. A quarter of the way up the trail, a quaint tunnel cut through the rock, allowing visitors to duck underneath. The hike was taxing, but so far their trip was going smoothly, and there were even bathroom huts stationed along the trail for convenience. So far, everything was charming and seemingly harmless. But a grim fate awaited them on the other side of Timpanogos Cave. As they approached the cave entrance, they came to an awning that granted shade to a small viewing area when the sun was on that side of the mountain. Today, the park uses this area to house a rigid rescue stretcher and some first aid equipment. It took the group roughly 40 minutes to reach the area where others had gathered to wait for the tour to start. Beyond the meeting place, Another paved walkway led to a rocky alcove. The stone above looked melted, eroded by rain, with different colored rocks crashing into each other. Below the eerie rock stood an old wooden door, reinforced with metal handles and riveted bars. Tour groups of up to 16 people funneled into the entryway, which had a small hole in the ceiling where the sun cast an eerie spotlight onto the door. Tour guides gave a brief history lesson of the cave, but of course they omitted the adventures of Ted and Brad and all the other true spelunkers who were trying to map the Timpanogos system and discover new caves. The cave followed a smooth walkway with railings, and the tunnel spiraled down into a room where a cave-in might have happened in the past, evidenced by boulders and a low-hanging ceiling. The breakage narrowly missed a large, smooth speleoform that was lit from the bottom to create the classic eerie campfire look. Now, even though the main Timpanogos Cave wasn't nearly as challenging or as dangerous as the interstate area, the tour gave visitors a taste of what caving has to offer, with a few passages requiring visitors to duck under rocky outcroppings or even crawl on their hands and knees through curated passages. The tour guide and translator described the mineral content of the cave and the ways that delicate hanging crystals form as they shine their lights at glistening stone, bubbling stalactites, and alien features in the cave. Then, the tour reached a passage dubbed the Fall Area, which had a 45-degree slant near the walkway. Just beyond that room, the tour was seemingly home free. The cave exited high in the mountains along another paved trail, and the group of families and friends from across the world stepped outside of the cave and into the sunlight once again. However, Timpanogos Cave wasn't done with them. Today, metal bars and chains line the walkway directly outside the entrance. Gravel, shrubs, and stone conceal a steep cliff just a few feet away on the other side of the rusted chains. A simple wooden sign warns guests not to run, but the gorgeous view no doubt lures visitors to the edge of the cliff as they look out across the valley at the tall mountain peaks, the drainage rivers snaking along their sides, and the spotted sections of dirt and trees that funnel into the ground below. These days, it's the kind of location TikTok influencers would lean over for a selfie, risking their lives for a few likes or follows. Some parents have to warn their kids not to play on the chains, but the kids in this group were well behaved. The group paused to talk about their adventure and to take a little rest. So far, they'd been hiking, crawling, and exploring for over 3 hours. Now, even though it's not as taxing as a regular cave, many people might underestimate the long trail into and out of Timpanogos. It was only 40 degrees inside the cave, but outside, the sweltering desert heat shocked the group. They removed some of their windbreakers or other layers before the sudden heat wave could cook them. The 3-year-old girl was hungry, so one of the adults handed her a can of chips. It was around 6 p.m., and the sun was dipping below the mountain, shrouding the trail in shadow. The girl was walking right in front of her mother, and her mother was keeping an eye on her, but the girl wasn't looking where she was going. She reached her hand into the can for a chip. With the can in front of her, and the path covered in shadow, she didn't see the bend in the trail ahead, and she slipped. Before anyone could react, the girl rolled under the chains. The scree, or loose stones, along the incline collapsed under her weight, and she fell down the side of Timpanogos Mountain right outside of the cave. The cliff isn't vertical at the edge, but it is very steep without any large boulders, trees, or shrubs to hold onto along some of its stretches. The slope past the trail has little variation in terrain until it reaches another ledge, and after this point, the slope drops into a true vertical cliff. There's a small flat space just before the cliff, but it was a long way down from the exit of Timpanogos Cave. The girl tumbled 75 feet down, but miraculously, she stopped rolling on the small ledge. Her cries indicated that somehow she was still alive. The two family friends, 46-year-old Vitaly Tsikoza from Russia and a similarly aged Ukrainian man, heard the girl crying, and without thinking, they jumped the guardrails and stumbled down the gravel to save her. In that split second when disaster struck, Their cultural identity didn't matter. They didn't even consider their similarities or their differences as they leaped into action. The Ukrainian man immediately felt the gravel start to pull him down the slope. He dug his heel into the ground and braced himself. He shuffled down as fast as he could, but he was cautious and he kept track of his surroundings. Next to him, he saw the pile of dust fly into the air as the Russian man sprinted down the cliff. His arms flailed as he tried to keep himself level. He barreled toward the girl lying in pain on the cliff, but he was going too fast. The Ukrainian man watched in horror as Vitaly tumbled past the girl and was flung from the cliffside. The Ukrainian was shocked, but he had to keep moving. Panicked, he continued slowly descending the steep mountainside until he reached the girl. The Russian man screamed as he fell. And after a moment, the Ukrainian reached the girl and attended to her as shouts and cries from her mother echoed from the trail above. Others on the tour stopped to gawk at the scene, and in the midst of the chaos, the Russian man's screams ceased. Another brave adventurer, Mickey Horak, climbed down to aid the Ukrainian man. Together, they kept her from the edge as they struggled with vertigo. She was only 2 feet from the ledge, and the small space could barely fit them both. The park ranger who helped translate for the group used his equipment to call for help. A separate ranger heard the call, and after a tense game of telephone, they reached the chief ranger, who contacted the county emergency rescue team, including a search and rescue and mountain cave rescue squad. Soon, they heard the sounds of sirens blaring down I-80. One man cradled the girl as she sobbed, while another dabbed the blood off of her face. They tried to keep her conscious, because after that trauma, she could easily fall into an irreversible coma. Emergency crews arrived quickly, but there was little they could do. They had to wait for a helicopter to save them. It took the medevac helicopter 2 painful hours to arrive. All the while, the Ukrainian friend couldn't bear to look down. Rescuers knew there was another cliff 50 feet below where the girl was stuck. They hoped Vitaly had fallen onto that ledge, because then there was a good chance he'd still be alive. As the helicopter approached the cliff, a spotter inside scanned the area and found him lying motionless in a drainage area. Even though the spotter was using binoculars in a moving vehicle, they could see that the Russian man suffered from unspeakable damage to his head, and his body was mangled by the fall. They pushed away the nauseating sight. Saving the girl was the helicopter's first priority. A paramedic used a life flight helicopter equipped with a special hoist, allowing a paramedic to rappel to the girl and load her safely into the helicopter. Rescuers climbed down from the trail area to aid the helicopter team and to help the girl into the hoist. The first rescuer got to her and instructed the other men to climb back up. Additional rescuers climbed down to aid the first. So much motion dislodged the rocks along the mountainside, and some small stones tumbled down, hitting the rescuers in the head. They were stunned, but they maintained composure and moved to shelter the girl. This one moment could have killed them all. The rescuers even reported receiving injuries from the falling stones. The rescue team extracted her from the ledge. Once on board, life flight copters are staffed by both a paramedic and a transport critical care flight nurse. The helicopter flew down and landed in a safe area. The emergency team stabilized her. Then a second helicopter arrived, and the team transferred her to that helicopter, which flew her to Salt Lake City's primary children's hospital. The first helicopter resumed the mission and took to the skies to assess the Russian who fell. Within minutes of the team approaching Vitaly, he was pronounced dead. Investigators were called to rule out foul play, and they found that he fell about 400 feet down to the cold valley below. The whole process slowed down at this point, but by nightfall, an investigation wrapped up, and the search and rescue team recovered the Russian's body at around 10:40 p.m. Rescuers carried his lifeless body past the cheery welcome sign at the visitor center below Timpanogos Cave, and the vehicle carrying his body passed right by Ted's famous interstate cave. The 3-year-old girl had a severe cut on her forehead, but because she was so small, her weight didn't create enough force upon impact with the cliff to cause further damage. She had no internal injuries and no broken bones, and she was given the green light to leave the hospital the very next day. That is the mind-blowing story of how Ted the Caver, the internet's first creepypasta, ended up connecting to multiple mysteries and other true tales of disaster. One man's daring sacrifice shows that no matter what nationality we hail from, we're all just one misstep away from dying, especially while exploring the otherworldly reaches of caves. Have you ever heard of Ted the Caver before? Or did you learn anything new about the classic caving mystery? Let us know in the comments below. Like the video, and make sure to subscribe to the channel to hear more uplifting and grim tales just like this one.